Good afternoon.
Hello, everyone. Oh, this worked. Great. Thank you all for coming. It's such a privilege to be here. This is my first trip to Perugia for the IJF, so it's really exciting to be presenting as well. Martin and I are going to be talking about working with editors on a project with the product team. Just as a quick show of hands, who would describe themselves as either product or editorial in their kind of role? Product? And editorial, I assume, is the rest of the room. Fantastic. This is a great split. This is exactly what we're after. Okay, so a quick intro from ourselves. So, hi everyone, I'm Matt Taylor. I'm a senior product manager at the Financial Times. I work on editorial technology, so typically that means like working with editors on content management and things like that. I also work with storytelling teams on new features around those kinds of things. My background is a bit weird because I kind of started in editorial. I started as a freelance sub, and then I worked my way through several kind of digital strategy roles at the Times of London before moving to the FT and joining a kind of more formal product role. And that's kind of where I find myself now, and I kind of identify in that area. Martin?
Yeah, so I represent the editorial side of this duality here. But I'm also kind of unusual in that I work in the visual and data journalism team at the FT, which is probably the closest thing we have in the newsroom to something that looks and feels a bit like a product team. We have people with engineering and design backgrounds. We write more code than English. It's kind of, I heard roles like mine described this morning in a session as a sort of a bridge function in the relationship to AI, but it's kind of true of a lot of product things. So I'm editorial, but perhaps product adjacent in the way that Matt is product, but editorial adjacent.
Thank you very much. So we're going to talk today about story of success in 2024, broadly in kind of 3 parts, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions at the end. I hope you have some. The first I will talk about the challenge of effective product management in newsrooms, and then we'll talk about a project that we worked on together and the kind of things that we did which made that, we think, successful, and then hopefully some takeaways and things that you can bring home after the festival. So firstly, I want to talk about the original product team, which is editorial in a way, right? And I think that's kind of where a lot of the tension in this kind of relationship has come from traditionally. It's easy to think that like agility and customer focus and those things kind of came out of the tech sector and have been kind of brought to newsrooms through product. But agility as a concept is not entirely new at all. Agility is something that newsrooms have been working with for a long time, and when I was working at the Times on kind of nights, I would be sitting listening to editors shout about breaking news and changes they were making. And those decisions that they were making in those moments are product decisions, right? They are choosing kind of what goes on the front, what goes in a newsletter, what gets a push notification, what doesn't get a push notification. Those things all affect the product as far as readers are concerned. And it all happens very, very quickly in short timescales, and they're iterating. So like this is where kind of like, you know, product coming in and saying, these are the things that we do, like that can create a bit of tension sometimes. And I think finding the way to work together on those concepts is where you can get real power. So I thought I'd do a couple of slides on like fun things that like what can product managers learn from editors. So like editors are the masters of rapid iteration and being flexible. Like they typically changing what they're working on several times a day, like rapidly thinking through multiple stories. They're really focused on the reader, thinking about like what their job is in order to update, educate, inform, influence. They're really good at storytelling, obviously, much better, I think, than a lot of product managers that I meet, particularly myself. I've had many a memo subbed and edited by an editor who has removed all my cliches, so that's always fun. But if there's one thing that I've found that editors really struggle with, aside from people like Martin, it's thinking more than like a week ahead. Martin tends to work on like long-term projects, and I think that's kind of where some of our alignment comes from often. But product managers often are kind of thinking in quarters and like years, and looking at how kind of the industry and technology is evolving, and trying to help people understand that is often a kind of point of a challenge. What can editors learn from product managers? It's not all one-sided, obviously, so I think we bring like structure, long-term thinking, cross-functional coordination. We introduce kind of structured experiments and frameworks for that, so we're not just guessing at what's working. We can try and kind of come at that with evidence and hypotheses. We can connect decisions with qualitative reader engagement and our kind of understanding of working directly in kind of workshops with readers and prospective readers to understand where their problems are. We're not just looking at kind of quantitative data, which I think is where a lot of newsrooms often kind of get stuck with kind of editorial analytics systems, like speaking to readers is really, really important. And we can decipher data on competitors, look at the market, look at user habits, and work really cross-functionally across the entire organization, like representing multiple parts of the business at the same time. And again, a bit of tension potentially comes from that sometimes as well. And where we can learn from editors is trying to justify our jobs in newsrooms. Editors don't have to, it's very obvious what they do. Product management is a hard thing to define sometimes. We were kind of just talking about it casually yesterday, and someone who I know and work with asked, hey, how do you guys as product managers define product management? There's 3 of us there and we all defined it differently. So it's a challenging thing sometimes to work out exactly like where you fit. And yesterday we had a talk of 15 years of product management, and one slide really like stuck with me there that like 93% of newsrooms thought the role of product management is really, really important, and then like 43% actually understood what it did. So I think that's a good takeaway. But it's where these two kind of disciplines come together, I think, where we can like really make magic happen. Editors just don't want to be told what is going to happen and how the product is going to work and how they need to adapt. They want to be involved in that. And product teams don't want to just be like order takers in a feature factory, right? We want to be part of those decisions and kind of like use what we've learned and what we can bring to the table to help make better ones. And where you have situations where there's mutual respect and a kind of shared urgency, I think the deadlines point that's been raised a few times is really important. We can really bounce off each other to make really significant change. And what this presentation is basically going to be moving forward is like a microcosm of this happening and how this looked like for us when we worked together to solve a real editorial need, and hopefully some things that you can learn from. So I want to take you back. 2024, year of democracy. Everyone loved it. It was a fantastic year. We at the FT were monitoring a bunch of dates, and 3 really stood out for us. So we had the 2nd of May in the UK. This was going to be the local council elections. And I don't know how many Brits there are in the audience, but I think we'll all remember that the Tories, the Conservative Party, were not very popular at this time. So this local election was really a kind of point where we would work out whether they would do well or, as was more likely, do very badly, and then choose when the date of the general election, which had to happen within about 12 months from that date, would occur. We kind of surmised that the Conservatives would push for a late election because they would do badly, and they'd probably want to do it like before the US general election in November. So October was a kind of good time. Just keep that thought in mind as we move forward. Late in 2023, we put together a design sprint on live storytelling because we realized that live storytelling was a really good key growth opportunity for us potentially. We wanted to transform the experience, and Michael Jarger is here, who was the product manager at the time, who put this sprint together. So if you want to talk about design sprints, he's an awesome facilitator for that. Please grab him. He's kind of a celebrity at this conference anyway. Design sprints, for those who haven't worked on one previously, are focus weeks of informative discussion, debate, discovery, ideation, iteration, and testing that takes you from a thought in people's minds to a tested idea in just 5 days. They're incredibly powerful as a kind of collaborative, engaging environment to do this kind of work, but they're completely incompatible with how newsrooms operate. As a desk editor, I might come up to you and I say, who can you take off shift for an entire week to join me in a room to work on this thing that you may not entirely believe in? And you end up getting like an intern or the most junior person on staff. And this really is bad because in these kind of sessions, you really need big hitters. You need people with big ideas, big thinkers, the people who are going to be affected by the change and also help drive the change for the rest of the newsroom. Half the battle of doing the design sprint is the work you do before the design sprint to convince everyone that the design sprint is a good idea, and getting the right people in the room is really important. So you need those kinds of people. You want to make sure that they're going to be able to impact, they're going to be able to think about new ideas. They're not just coming into the room to take an idea they already have and defend it. They're open to kind of new collaboration and like exploring how you as a group can work on that idea and take it to the next point. I've never really run a sprint where you've had an editor on Monday morning with the classic look of, I don't know what I'm doing here, I don't know what the point of this is, and this happens all the time. This is the usual reaction from an editor entering a design sprint. It was Martin's reaction, frankly, on day one. But then by Friday, they're so engaged and they're like, oh my God, how can we make this happen? This is a fantastic idea. I'm really bought into it. It's a really, really great process. So yeah, Martin was one of those magic people. He's influential in the newsroom. He's kind of action-orientated. How can we actually move things forward? And he came to the session with all the expertise we needed to make this happen. He'll talk a bit about that now.
Okay, so yeah, so I was one of these people who had a particular thing. I was coming to it from a very particular perspective. I've been at the FT 14 years now. I've covered every US, UK, German, French, etc. election since that time, and I largely from the perspective of the data journalism team. So obtaining election data, analyzing it, largely producing graphics like the one you see up there. We knew this was going to be a big part of what we were doing. We had a lot of big plans for that kind of work in 2024. But there was one thing that all of that prior experience had taught me was a real weakness of our coverage of those kinds of events, those big high traffic, high reader attention moments where there was a lot of data to be displayed. And that was that we had these dashboards that are largely exploratory. They give you all the information that's publicly available and let you as the reader dig down into the parts that you want. And we also have this other thing, this analytical, explanatory type of journalism that picks out the interesting bits out of all that data and runs it often in the form like this, in a live blog. And what has tended to happen, certainly at the FT, and I've noticed this in other news organizations as well, is that you end up with competing URLs, two competing parts of the website that are essentially cannibalizing traffic off of each other because each part of the platform is most suitable to a different type of content. One very suitable for fast-moving text, one very suitable for fast-moving graphics. And the ideal, and the thing that we really wanted to solve in 2024, given the sequence of elections that we were anticipating, was to really overcome this problem a little bit, try to link these two parts of our coverage more closely together so that the large amounts of traffic that we were anticipating getting from the graphics end through search would also lead, would drive more traffic into the text-based things that were largely on the live blog. And conversely, we wanted people who were accustomed to our live blog coverage to become more familiar with the work that we do on the sort of exploratory graphics side. So my aim was to figure out what functionalities we could start building that would allow us to link those two bits together. In the ideal, they would all be on one page, but we were pretty confident that that would be too tricky to achieve in the time frame available. And we had some thoughts about this because we realized that this wasn't the only use case where we had this problem. It wasn't just about elections, but even in the run-up to elections, we knew we had this problem. Before every major election, there's a period where there's obsessive coverage of polling to give you a sense of the range of possible outcomes of the election. And these are very similarly data-heavy events. They're much longer in time span, but they involve incremental updates to something that is shown in aggregate in a visual form usually. And it's very difficult in that visual form to pull out the interesting new developments in the data. It's quite unusual because journalism tends to be about focusing on the new things, but in these cases we often end up really prioritizing the aggregate view. And one of the things that we'd seen one of our competitors do in the past was to use the live blog format as a way of bridging that, of using individual blog posts about polls in this case to highlight the new information that was being added to the graphics. And we thought this was a really good idea. And this was in the previous election cycle, and we hadn't really had an opportunity to do much about that. And it was interesting because we recalled that was a similar problem we had faced on other major stories where data and tracking data was an important thing, such as the COVID pandemic. Here, this chart, which my colleague John Byrne-Murdoch made quite famous, was initially made manually over and over every day. We soon realized that that wasn't a viable way of doing it because every reader wanted a slightly different view of it. We switched over to focusing on an automated interactive graphic, but then we lost the ability to annotate the important new developments on a day-by-day basis. readers could find them for themselves, but you had to still make these manually annotated graphics every day to give a good sense of what important developments people should be paying attention to. And once again, one of the most interesting solutions we came across for overcoming this problem of switching between the explanatory and exploratory formats for reporting on data was a live blog. In this case, a heavily automated live blog produced for the Italian news agency ANSA by Applied Excel, which is a startup focusing on AI solutions in journalism. And actually that, the clue there also was in the AI, right? In the AI fact, in the fact that this is an AI-focused company. We knew that with the interest in generative AI emerging in our newsroom as well, there would be other applications coming our way where we would automate the production of text in some way. The exact details of that were still unclear, but we knew we would need tooling for that. We also knew that there was a long tradition in journalism, over a decade now, of automatically monitoring data feeds for newsworthy events. And we tend to refer to this as tripwires. We send alerts to reporters when interesting patterns are detected in data sets. But you can take that further. You can use that to trigger production processes, to start writing draft stories with the key information that a reporter will need to start the ball rolling on a rolling story. Sorry about that. So my favorite example of this is probably the oldest. The Los Angeles Times' QuakeBot, which monitors seismological data, crucially makes news judgment decisions about which of those data points are important, and uses those to trigger a process for writing data-centric nibs of stories, and also graphics. So it's kind of the most complete news automation process that we're aware of. And this has been running for over a decade. It's still running today. It's been widely emulated. This is a well-established pattern in journalism that we knew there were plenty of applications for in our work as well. We know that there is a large tradition of this approach being applied particularly in local journalism and in news agencies to quickly create lots of different types of stories from data. And obviously, as a financial publication, there are opportunities there for us in covering fast-moving events in markets that require us to be able to generate text about data more quickly than it is possible for someone to write that text manually while looking up the numbers they need. So in a way, and so this was something we had experimented with previously. We wanted to see if we could help our markets reporters, who are often in the difficult position of having to continuously update a story where the data points are moving more quickly than they can write the updates. I'm sure there's a lot of that going on this week, I'm afraid. One of the things we wanted to learn was how could we help reporters in that position get fast-moving numbers into their copy quickly. And so we attempted to do some of this with stock market data, sort of emulating some work that Schibsted have done in the past in Norway. And we learned several things from that experiment. This was about 3 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
Matt and I worked on this. And we learned that every newsroom need is quite different. So a lot of the examples that I've just shown you are really suitable for news agencies, for local journalism, but not necessarily suitable for an organization like the FT that takes a much more selective view about what news it reports. We're not trying to be comprehensive. We're not trying to move at the speed of markets in the way some news agencies might. This is not, we don't have those needs of scale and speed that some other publishers have. But we also learned that actually doing the mechanics of generating text from data is not that difficult. Even before the widespread use of LLMs, or perhaps especially because we weren't using LLMs, this is not actually that difficult. What is difficult, that we also learned from this pilot project, was getting the data, just having the data in your business to be able to do these kinds of things in the markets context in particular is quite challenging. There are complex rights issues involved. It's not just a matter of plugging in someone's API and off you go. So that is one thing that we figured out, we realized we would have to learn, and that actually it might be easier to develop this in the context of something where that data is available, such as an election, rather than going straight into our better bread and butter topics of financial markets and economics. And the other thing that we learned is that getting generated content into the content management system is itself a challenge. If you don't have a mechanism for doing that, you end up cutting and pasting, and copy paste kills any efficiency you gained by automating the process in the first place. So we realized the thing that we were missing for all of these kinds of things, not just elections, was some sort of input API for our content management system. And so this is the germ of the idea that had been bubbling for several years before we even entered the design sprint.
Absolutely. So enter the autoposts API, a name that has taught me that the first name that you come up with for a system will forever be what it is called by everyone ever. So please try harder and come up with a better name than autoposts. So to take you back to the design sprint, Martin's obviously really in tune with this idea, so it's just one of the things that comes out of it, and I've pulled out some of the examples of the things that we ended up prototyping and actually user testing. So on the left you can see this kind of extremely rapid wireframe of what an automated post from a data feed might look like. And on the right you can see something that looks a little bit more like what that might look like on the FT, because once we're at the point of user testing, we need to make it look and feel a bit more like a real product. It wasn't the only thing that we shipped, though, and it certainly wasn't the first thing that we shipped. We were excited about what came out of the design sprint, and editors were as well, but we didn't immediately jump to work on what we saw as one of the trickiest ideas, the autoposts idea. It wasn't because it wasn't valuable, but it's just because it was complicated. There was a lot more to work out. We had to understand how we were going to build this new API, what editorial transparency discussions we needed to have. Did we need to highlight that on the post or not? And we had faster things we could roll out. So what was valuable is that in that sprint, we had designed a whole bunch of different ideas, and there were lots of things that we could iteratively ship over the course of the next couple of months, whilst everyone else also works on this problem in the background. And these things meant a lot to the editors who had joined the design sprint and put their heart and soul into these thoughts. So it really helped us keep momentum with the rest of the newsroom as well, and gave us this breathing room to work on the tricky problem whilst we had everyone on board. Delivery on this project actually started with a collaborative product requirements document, or PRD, which is probably a common term to a lot of the product people in the room. We took inspiration from the Amazon-style memo format, so you all kind of sit in silently for the first 10 minutes reading through the presentation, the deck, the whatever document. And then we went around the group asking questions, clarifying, challenging assumptions, working out priorities. I got to check on whether my initial assumptions were correct and whether they needed to be twisted slightly to conform with what editors expected. And the editors were not just consulted, they were really involved in the idea generation and shaping the brief. Engineers were flagging implementation issues, and we kept this to a much smaller group with just those key editors until we'd worked out exactly what we needed to do and how. And then that was the point where we were able to take that further to the live team and work on that more. It was a real turning point for us. It helped us really get clear alignment and unblock ourselves. And because it was all captured live in one document, it became a really nice place to go back to remind everyone of what the original purpose was, what we'd agreed on, where our decisions were.
So from all that, we learned a few important things. We realized we didn't need an end-to-end solution specific to the election problems that we anticipated. Why? Because we had in my team the capability to do the data extraction work and the text generation work. We just couldn't get it into our core systems. We also didn't need to figure out a whole new way of working in the live blog because we have established workflows for that. We have an in-house built blogging system. We have a team that manages that. They have established ways of working. We didn't need to reinvent that wheel. What we did need was, as we said, this API for securely posting things into our content management system programmatically as opposed to manually typing them in. And we needed a new UI for that established team. So basically the first part was basically for me and my team. The second part was for Oliver Ralph, our liveblog's editor at the time, and his team to be able to interact with the things that we were providing them in that way. This was kind of a new set of editing steps that would be needed, and that meant they needed some new interfaces in the blogging platform. So we had kind of two user groups that needed to be served here with this product.
I'm not going to show you the API design because that's really boring and doesn't translate well to a presentation, but I can show you the wireframe of some prototypes that we came up with. So this is an example of one that didn't make it. And I think it's always good to try and early on challenge multiple ideas and create multiple wireframes for things, particularly when you're working internally with editors. It gives them a feeling, and it's the truth and reality, that they are part of a process at an early stage and you're not showing them something that's finished. If you show them something that looks finished, even though it's very easy to do in Figma nowadays, it's actually, I think, worse in some respects because it makes people feel like they're actually out of the discussion and you're just instructing them what to do. So working in this wireframe format, I think, is a really good step to do that. And we also made sure that whatever we built, we were building something really generic because we knew from all of Martin's input initially that there were so many potential opportunities that this could cover, not just elections, but as said, like another pandemic or, yeah, let's yeah, maybe just that one. But the earthquakes, whatever, like the FT has a lot of like potential in markets information that we'd want to cover as well, and we wanted to make sure that all of that would fit within the same UI. So when I looked at the feedback from the PRD, I noticed that there was a point about how we might want to automatically publish some of this stuff. We didn't end up doing that, but what we did in terms of the UI was not just to do that, but to do other things as well. So we created this idea about multiple channels, as you can see on the left, this little kind of drop-down menu of various different feeds of information that were coming in at once. So editors could pick from a markets feed and an election feed at the same time and wouldn't have the two sets of posts coming together. When you build like a specific idea like QuakeBot, not to chastise the LA Times for this because I'm sure they've moved on, but like, you know, that works as a great POC in the first instance, and that's kind of where we started. But it's great to try and just build products a little bit further because, as everyone in the room will know, editors will hack things to death and try to make something happen even if it wasn't designed to do so. So the more that you can design for those kinds of cases in the first place, the more like hassle and stress you save yourself later. So yay, we got our first post. This was during the local elections, 1:18 a.m. on the 3rd of May. We got our first outing. It was pretty good. We had an issue where basically half the posts took multiple clicks to publish, and there was some weird bugs and things, so it was really good that we had this kind of low-stakes example to run this with. But ultimately, it worked really well, and we maybe over-enthusiastically published over 100 individual local council election results. Which we looked back on and we thought perhaps, but it was still very good. The one thing that we could get out of this was a better idea of our success metrics though. So like as a product manager, I'm going into a discussion with someone, and I've mentioned it a couple of times to people I've met over the course of the last couple of days, like what does success mean for you? Like what is the purpose of doing the thing that you're trying to achieve here? And for us, when we were talking to editors, one of the things that came up as the reason to do this was speed. Like it took them multiple minutes to go through, compile the information, work out when there had been a result, compile the information, talk to the reporters, put it into the CMS, format it all correctly. That's going to take you 3 or 4 minutes to do each time. And the more times you have to do that, the more repetitive it is, the more painful it is. So speed for us meant a lot. So we worked with a OKR, objective and key result format, to come up with a key result for the success of this project, which was to try and reduce that publish time to less than 2 minutes. And the really nice thing about this is it was really easy to record because we had all the publish dates of all of the posts. So we went back the kind of night after and looked at all the posts, and as you can see, we have posts here that were kind of like a minute apart from each other. So that's a huge success, I think, for being able to reduce that and really show the impact of what we were doing. And here we actually have a live video of this functioning. So yeah.
Yeah, let's play it. I mean, what you're going to see here is on the left
if it will play.
If it will play.
Play, you silly video.
what you should be seeing on the left is what's happening on...
Okay, we may have to skip this. Or is it? No, we'll have to skip it. This is very embarrassing because it's the reason I use this particular slide format was to have a live video in the presentation. And Martin may do a live demo for you later, maybe afterwards. Okay, so what you will have seen is Martin's screen running down the right-hand side with all these posts coming in and you being able to select them from the side. It all worked really well. We were thinking about the next election coming forward. Whenever that would be, the betting markets were saying it was going to be in October, just before the presidential election, so we had some time to think about some UX tweaks to improve the experience. So firstly, we had editors complaining that they didn't know when they'd added a post, whether it had been published or not, whether it was in draft state. There are multiple editors in the blog at once, so this was obviously an immediate concern. So we worked with our designer to come up with some way of identifying in the sidebar which posts had been published and which hadn't. And we started to consider how you might merge channels because Martin had really cleverly worked on a solution where we had I think we were just talking about the general election in this case, but we wanted to have kind of VIP constituencies and kind of a raw feed of everything. And to see both and flick back between them constantly was going to be really, really difficult. And I think this iteration point is really, really important because one of the reasons that product managers get like a bad rap with editors is because we leave them with MVPs constantly and we just move on to the next thing. And it makes people feel like you don't care about them, like you're not actually making the experience much better for them. You will just make a kind of like rubbish first version and then move on. So I think it's really good to try and do this because otherwise you end up with these overly directed, forceful, over-spec'd initial versions of things that editors won't let you get away with anything less. And that's only because product teams have in the past let them down and left them with worse experiences than they're expecting. So if you can build that trust with editors that you can do the next version, you will end up with people actually buying into the concept of an MVP. Anyway, we didn't have as much time with that because on the 23rd of May, Sunak got very wet and called a general election. We had 6 weeks to build the rest. Suddenly, timeframes became really important for us again. So this was mentioned on a panel discussion yesterday as well, that timeframes really focus us. And I think that is extremely true. In this case, we were already thinking about ideas that we could do for this. Again, I'm showing you things that never shipped. We built kind of TweetDeck style boards for editors to pick from multiple channels for. But talking to our engineering team, this stuff just wasn't feasible in the time frame that we had. So we had to kind of like work on a version that editors liked a bit less, but was still going to be functional and was still going to work. And this really helped, I think, editors also understand like the pressure that we were under as well, because we wanted to make sure that we had that improvement for them at the time. So we added this drop-down with a multi-selector, which unfortunately you would have seen earlier had the video worked. And we added a hashing requirement, so Martin's script could crash on the night, as it, I think, had a couple of times, and he could restart it without accidentally reposting all the results that had already happened back to the blog, which would have been very confusing for everyone. We're going to skip the general election because the general election went very well, and basically from that point we were all very good. So we reaped the rewards of having built a perfect platform in the first instance. I got to take a nice break. I think we ended up working on other things, and Martin had more work to do.
Yeah, the reason I look grumpy in that picture is that only the circled part was done, and we still had to build the rest for the US general election. But fortunately, this part was absolutely done by this point. And so on the night of November 5th, or November 6th as it was, we were able to push out this notification within seconds of the AP calling the presidential election for Donald Trump. And this was, what we've skipped here is actually a version on the general election. You'll have noticed there's a lot more text here than in our initial version. A lot of this text wouldn't have actually been, in this case, this is, I think, the default manual, the default text that the system produced. But for most of the things that we published, both in the general election and the presidential election, most of that copy was then replaced by the journalists working on the live blog to provide additional analysis, add quotes from people they had interviewed, change the headline from the default one, and really write around the numbers, because the real purpose of this was not to provide finished products, but rather drafts that contained all of the numbers that you would want to write around in the context of an election or a market story. So in a way, this is not what the intended use was, to just get the thing out as quickly as possible, although you can have that option. Typically, what we wanted to see happen was people to use these as drafts so that they could focus on the why and the how of the story rather than the raw numbers, which is usually in the past what they've had to focus on because just getting that into the post takes so much time.
So, what did we learn?
So, as Hannah said in the session yesterday, organizing around a major news event or a series of major news events is really good for focusing the attention of a sort of cross-departmental and cross-functional team like this. Because we knew this series of elections was coming, we could focus on providing the tooling that we would need for them. But also, as Hannah said, this is not our bread and butter. We're not Politico. We're not the Washington Post. This is not the key thing that we cover, right? So always in the back of our mind were the other applications that we would want to apply this to in the future. But elections are great as data-heavy, heavily scheduled events that you can plan ahead for and organize your working around. There's not too many of those. You know, if you have a sports department, you might have the Olympics or certain key scheduled events like that you could use in a similar way. But generally, elections are the most obvious ones for this. It also helps to focus on these big events because they touch lots of different editorial teams. So I don't spend all that much time working with the live news team. But on events like this, I do, and so it was a good opportunity to get these sort of, even within editorial spaces, a lot of cooperation that we normally don't have an opportunity to get.
Yeah, and I think when we build things, trying to find opportunities where you can kill two birds is super important. Making sure that anything that you do can be manipulated to fill multiple goals is really helpful because, as I said, editors like to hack things, and the worse you leave people in that kind of situation, the more they end up doing those kinds of things, and the worse the product gets kind of overall. And the killer factor here was also making sure that we built more than that first iteration. Like, we were working with that team, building trust with that team. We learned more about our users and their use cases. We encountered the same challenges. We built empathy with them. And as a result, now we have more trust with that team moving forward. So when we then encounter them again and we work with them again, we're in a really, really good place to do so. So, some little takeaways that hopefully you can bring back to your newsroom after the conference. So, try some collaborative PRDs, product requirements documents. Read and comment as a group, build confidence that you know each other's work. Just use a Google Doc to start with, right? Write up what your assumptions are, be humble, ask for feedback. This doesn't matter if you're an editor or a product manager, right? You can try doing the same kind of techniques. I don't want to gatekeep anything. Like, I feel like this is a good thing for everyone to try out.
But don't call them PRDs.
Oh yeah, but don't call them PRDs. Unless you make my mistake. Yeah, that's a weird product term, but it's the same kind of document, right? You're basically putting your assumptions on paper so everyone can critique them and work together. And find ways to make that conversation efficient, right? So have the kind of like Amazon style, let's all sit and make sure that we're all aligned, or like move the questions out to another document so that you can link in or something like that. Secondly, like, build the foundations for iteration. So I just kind of mentioned this, but I think part of this is really building trust. Don't wait for the next idea from the newsroom. Kind of work with them to understand where their needs are so that you are the person that they know understands what they need to be able to do. If you're a product manager, work with the team, sit with them, shadow them, understand all their processes. And if you're an editorial person and you want to help product teams out, bring them into the discussions. Do not launch things without them. Value their expertise in how to get things done. See yourselves as partners in their work. I really, really appreciate that. I think everyone would. You can focus on just what the next most important thing is. You can build MVPs together. You can build momentum around whatever that is. And thirdly, by far probably the most actionable thing, try and run a design sprint this year. Work with a few high-profile editors, convince them of the value, talk about how the FT did it if you need, Make sure they attend the whole week. Do not allow them to just come in for a couple of hours over a couple of days. They need to really see the thing happening and be involved in the process, or they will just feel like an observer and not a participant. And make sure they leave really excited at the end. I don't think you'll find this very difficult, because I do think it's very easy to make these things very exciting at the end. You do move very, very quickly, and people feel like stuff is happening. But you need to come up with actionable takeaways and make sure that you have the momentum inside your product or editorial organization to move on them. So finally, I just want to say thanks to the team. These are all the folks that worked with, It Takes a Village, particularly Polly Fullerton, who's on the left here in the top, fantastic product designer on our team and built so much empathy with all of the editorial teams. We miss her, she's on maternity leave, it's very sad. But the rest of the folks, and you can see who the editorial folks are from their headshots here, but Martin and Oliver particularly were absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate you being here. Very happy to answer any questions. Here are our socials. Feel free to email us.
Should we try? I think I know why the video didn't work.
Oh, and Martin may be able to play the video, but thank you.
Question.
Do you have a microphone?
Oh. No. You've got to play it from there. Got to get your mouse over there.
No, it doesn't work that way.
Hi guys, fantastic talk. Interested to know a bit about how you work with your technology teams to deliver this. Were they sort of handed over to you on this one, and you work with them hand in hand, or did you have to collaborate with technology? Could you just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so at the FT, product and technology is kind of the unit. Technology is kind of like the team that has existed for a longer time, and then product is kind of a bit more recent. Martin's going to try and get this to work while I answer. We kind of work like product teams. So there is a product manager, there is a product designer, there are multiple engineers that all kind of like sit on the team and have the same responsibility. So they're all involved in the process throughout, and I think that's the really important thing. So when we're doing the product requirements document, the engineers are in the call, right? And we are discussing with editorial about what the approach should look like, what the kind of need is, and they're thinking, okay, how are we going to structure this API? What are the kinds of things that we're going to need to build? And it's not like the conversation becomes like overly technical at that point, but I think you start to have the right people ask the right questions to the people that know the answers, rather than, I really hate this idea of like the product manager is that gatekeeper that kind of like runs between engineering and the stakeholders. I feel like they're a coordinator and facilitator of that, but you should be able to have really open communication. So that's how we kind of structured, and we're able to move really quickly as a result. Yeah.
Hi guys, thanks for the great talk. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the PRD system, the kind of very first parts of the projects, and kind of how you've settled on the format that you have.
Yeah, sure. So I think PRDs tend to change a bit depending on the kind of project that you're doing. So in this one, we'd had the design sprint already, so we had some kind of ideas that had come out of that already. And then the structure of the PRD was a bit like, okay, here's me just dumping a load of ideas in terms of how I think we are assuming that this is going to work. So it is more about gaining alignment and clarity around that singular vision than it is about like specifically describing this is going to happen and then this is going to happen and then this API is going to do this particular thing or something. Like you just want to know what the expectations are from everyone so everyone in the room understands the same thing. And that was the purpose of that initial document. So we kind of had, my initial take, everyone reads through that, and then we had a kind of table at the bottom in the tool that we use where everyone could add questions and vote on those questions, and we had a kind of discussion around it. And then we wrote down the answers to those things. So all the decisions that were made were kind of like put into that document. And then we kind of move away, and it becomes a bit more of a kind of like engineering discussion. Okay, so how do we achieve this goal? That happens a little bit separately, but it then gets applied to the document, so everyone kind of like still knows what the approach is. And we split those things out into tickets, start working on it, and we worked with Martin at that point to kind of like boot up a Slack channel and say like, here's the API, here's how it's going to work, is that going to work for you, you know, continue the discussion that way. So that initial kind of call was just hour and a half, everyone sit in a room or sit remotely on a call and read through the document and ask questions of each other and just make sure that by the end of that, we all knew what we were trying to build.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I've seen that nobody's asking questions, so I thought I would ask one.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah. So this is probably sort of a bit more related to the scaling up idea that you mentioned about building a CMS that is livable and you can basically build on it, right, and iterate. How did you plan at the very beginning for the tool to be flexible in terms of being able to adopt and integrate other ideas, right? Because you mentioned that right at the beginning, you started with decision-making editors, and then you want to open this up to maybe the audience team or maybe the other team in the newsroom. And how did you make sure that the tool is flexible in terms of being able to adopt to, you know, other formats of journalism, for example, introducing a bit of podcast promotion, newsletter promotion, not just text or interactive data infographics. So I'm just trying to understand the scaling up process.
I mean, I think when we talked about scaling up, it is specifically about this particular tool is specifically about giving the same level of accessibility to, or the same ability to publish at speed data that we have always had in the graphics context in a textual context as well. That was really the only objective, and that could be applied to many different things, right? And so when we talked about scaling that, it's not necessarily about adding additional formats, it's just about different applications. We wanted to keep it generic enough so that you could basically dump any sort of data into it. There we go. So this is what you're seeing on the left. I'll come back to this. What you're seeing on the left is the stuff that's happening on my team's server. It's getting the election results, it's processing them, it's dumping them into the autoposts API. This is on the right is what the liveblog team sees. They're selecting a channel. In this case, they want the mayoral elections. They're picking the Manchester one. And there you have the post that's been generated by the system, right? So this process, as you see, has taken a few seconds. No manual typing from one system into another, no having to format that table. The reporter can spend all of their time working on the added value type of reporting that they can add to the raw numbers that we've provided. Why did this election result play out the way that it did? So this was just kind of to give you a sense of how fast the system actually is. We were measuring in seconds between when things dropped on the Press Association's wire and when it was live on our blog in some cases. So this is, to return to your question though, the reason this works across any type of things is it doesn't care what data we've put into this API. We could have put any sort of text that's machine generated in any way into this format. One of the things that we haven't managed to build yet is support for dynamically generated graphics within this, which is kind of a major oversight. But there's good technical reasons for that. But that's definitely something that we want to add going forward. The podcast promotion thing, there was another, I think one of our slides showed one of the other projects that came out of the design sprint was these little promotional cards for other types of content within the live blog context. And that can also be used for podcasts as well, for example. So,
I can't remember which slide it's on. I apologize. You can play this again. I also wanted to say just on that point you mentioning around flexibility and like knowing like where else you can go. I think that's a function as well of like being really close to the newsroom as a PM, right? Is like worked with Martin for a long time. kind of see inside his head a little bit, right? And like, I know the kinds of things that he's really interested in. So when we're starting to think about this particular project, like from working closely with people for a long time and working with newsrooms for a long time, you start to build a bit of intuition around like, okay, well, it's probably also going to be useful in these kinds of contexts. So I think like the processes that you can build into your relationship between the product and newsroom kind of parts of the organization to enable that are really important. And yeah, anything you can do to kind of like build that relationship helps. I think we're just out of time. So thank you all. Really, really appreciate it.